David Chen had been telling friends in the days before his death that something felt wrong with Amanda. He complained that her behavior in the kitchen had become strange, that he constantly felt like he was being watched. But no one believed that the talented 35-year-old chef Amanda Wilson could actually be capable of murder. Not until David's body was found in the kitchen. The discovery came on October 12, 2018, in the pristine kitchen of Bourbon and Amp, Bluegrass, one of Louisville's most acclaimed farm-to-table restaurants where both David and Amanda worked as sous chefs under executive chef Marcus Thompson. David was found collapsed near the prep station at 6:30 a.m. by the morning dishwasher, his body positioned as if he had simply fallen while preparing ingredients for the day's lunch service. That if you're following cases where workplace competition turns deadly and the warning signs are ignored until it's too late, make sure you're subscribed, because what investigators discovered about Amanda Wilson's jealousy and David Chen's final weeks would reveal how professional kitchens can become hunting grounds for predators who use their culinary expertise to commit the perfect murder. The initial assumption was that David had suffered a medical emergency while working alone in the kitchen during the early morning hours when most restaurant staff hadn't yet arrived for their shifts. At 32 years old, David appeared to be in excellent health, but the high-stress environment of professional cooking was known to take a physical toll on even young chefs, and sudden cardiac events weren't unheard of in an industry characterized by long hours, physical demands, and constant pressure to perform at the highest levels. Detective Sarah Rodriguez of the Louisville Metropolitan Police Department had been called to the scene as a matter of routine, since any unexplained death required investigation regardless of how natural it might appear. Rodriguez had worked dozens of cases involving deaths in workplace settings, and her initial impression was that David's death would likely be classified as natural causes once the medical examiner completed the autopsy and toxicology reports. But David's friends and co-workers painted a picture of a young man who had been increasingly anxious and paranoid in the weeks leading up to his death, describing behavior that was completely uncharacteristic for someone known for his calm professionalism and easygoing nature. Several people mentioned that David had specifically expressed concerns about Amanda Wilson, though none of them had taken his worries seriously enough to suggest that he might be in actual physical danger. The restaurant industry in Louisville was small and tightly knit, with chefs and kitchen staff frequently moving between establishments as they built their careers and developed their reputations. David and Amanda had known each other for 3 years, having worked together at 2 different restaurants before both being hired at Bourbon and Amp, Bluegrass in early 2018. Their professional relationship had always been cordial but competitive, as both were ambitious young chefs with aspirations of eventually running their own kitchens. Amanda Wilson had been working in Louisville restaurants for over 8 years, building a reputation as a skilled and creative chef with a particular expertise in foraged ingredients and traditional preservation techniques that had made her valuable to restaurants seeking to authentically represent Kentucky's culinary heritage. She was known for her encyclopedic knowledge of local flora, her ability to identify edible plants and mushrooms that most people would never notice, and her talent for incorporating these ingredients into sophisticated dishes that impressed both critics and customers. Her expertise in mycology had earned her recognition beyond the restaurant industry, with local foraging groups and culinary schools regularly inviting her to conduct workshops on mushroom identification and safe foraging practices. Amanda had been featured in several magazine articles about Louisville's farm-to-table movement, and her Instagram account showcasing foraged ingredients had attracted over 15,000 followers who were fascinated by her ability to find culinary treasures in Kentucky's forests and fields. The recognition Amanda had received for her foraging expertise had initially been a source of professional pride, but it had gradually become a burden as she felt increasingly pressured to maintain her reputation as the premier mushroom expert in Louisville's culinary scene. The pressure had intensified as more chefs began incorporating foraged ingredients into their menus, creating competition for what Amanda had previously considered her exclusive specialty. Amanda's psychological profile, developed through extensive interviews with friends, family members, and former colleagues, revealed a woman whose self-worth had become entirely dependent on professional recognition and whose identity was inseparable from her reputation as a mushroom expert. The prospect of being overshadowed by other chefs, particularly someone like David who approached foraging from a scientific rather than intuitive perspective, had triggered a deep-seated fear of professional irrelevance that had gradually evolved into murderous jealousy. David Chen had arrived in Louisville 2 years earlier after completing culinary school in Chicago, drawn to the city's emerging reputation as a destination for innovative Southern cuisine that respected traditional techniques, while embracing modern flavors and presentations. His background in classical French techniques combined with his interest in Asian fusion had made him a valuable addition to kitchens that were experimenting with new approaches to regional American cooking. David's culinary philosophy emphasized the importance of understanding ingredients at a molecular level, and he had spent considerable time studying the science behind cooking techniques and flavor development. His approach was methodical and precise, characteristics that had made him popular with executive chefs who valued consistency and reliability in their kitchen operations. Unlike many young chefs who relied on intuition and creativity, David approached cooking as a science that could be perfected through careful study and practice. The clash between Amanda's intuitive approach to foraging and David's scientific methodology had created philosophical tensions that extended far beyond simple professional rivalry. Amanda viewed David's emphasis on food safety protocols and commercial sourcing standards as a threat to the artisanal traditions that she believed were essential to authentic regional cuisine. She interpreted his questions about mushroom identification techniques as personal attacks on her expertise and credibility. David, meanwhile, had become increasingly concerned about the potential liability issues that could arise from serving customers ingredients that hadn't been subjected to rigorous safety testing. His background in food science had made him acutely aware of the risks associated with wild mushrooms, and he had begun advocating for stricter policies regarding foraged ingredients that would have effectively limited Amanda's ability to showcase her specialty. The professional rivalry between Amanda and David had been evident to their co-workers from the beginning, but it had initially seemed like the healthy competition that often drove talented individuals to excel in demanding creative fields. Both chefs were vying for advancement opportunities in an industry where promotions were rare and highly coveted, and their different backgrounds and specialties had seemed to complement rather than conflict with each other's strengths. But the dynamic had shifted noticeably in the months leading up to David's death, particularly after executive chef Marcus Thompson had begun publicly praising David's innovative menu suggestions and featuring several of his dishes as seasonal specials that had received positive reviews from local food critics. Amanda's behavior toward David had become increasingly cold and hostile, though she had been careful to maintain a professional facade when supervisors were present. The tension between Amanda and David had been exacerbated by their fundamentally different approaches to ingredient sourcing and menu development. Amanda prided herself on her connection to Kentucky's natural environment and her ability to create dishes that told the story of the region's ecology and agricultural heritage. She viewed David's more scientific approach as sterile and disconnected from the land that produced the ingredients they worked with. David, meanwhile, had begun to question some of Amanda's foraging practices, expressing concerns about food safety protocols and the wisdom of serving restaurant customers ingredients that hadn't been sourced through established commercial channels. His questions about Amanda's mushroom identification skills and his suggestions that the restaurant should establish stricter policies about foraged ingredients had struck Amanda as personal attacks on her expertise and professional reputation. The escalation of tension between the two chefs had been gradual but persistent, beginning with subtle professional disagreements and evolving into personal animosity that affected the entire kitchen's working environment. Other staff members had begun to notice the hostility between Amanda and David, with several co-workers later reporting that they had tried to avoid working shifts when both chefs were present due to the uncomfortable atmosphere their rivalry created. Marcus Thompson, the executive chef, had been aware of the tension between Amanda and David but had initially viewed it as typical kitchen drama that would resolve itself over time. The high-pressure environment of professional cooking often created conflicts between staff members, and Thompson had decades of experience managing personality clashes and professional rivalries. He had occasionally spoken with both chefs about maintaining professionalism in the workplace, but he hadn't recognized the depth of Amanda's resentment or the potential danger it represented. David's concerns about Amanda had begun in late August 2018, about 6 weeks before his death, when he started noticing that she seemed to be monitoring his movements and activities in ways that made him uncomfortable. He told friends that Amanda would position herself where she could watch him work, that she seemed to know details about his schedule and personal life that he hadn't shared with her, and that she had begun making subtle but cutting remarks about his techniques and menu suggestions. The stalking behavior had escalated gradually, with Amanda finding excuses to be present whenever David was working on new recipes or menu items. She would offer unsolicited advice about ingredient selection and preparation methods, suggestions that David initially interpreted as helpful collegiality but which he gradually recognized as attempts to undermine his confidence and professional standing. Amanda's criticism became increasingly specific and personal, targeting not just David's techniques but his cultural background and culinary training. The situation had escalated in September when David's mushroom and truffle risotto had been featured as a signature dish at a special dinner event that attracted several prominent food writers and restaurant industry professionals. The positive attention that David received for the dish had seemed to trigger a more intense level of hostility from Amanda, who had apparently expected to be chosen to showcase her own foraged mushroom expertise for such an important event. The success of David's risotto had been particularly galling to Amanda because it had demonstrated that his scientific approach to mushroom preparation could produce results that matched or exceeded her own intuitive methods. The dish had been praised by critics for its perfect balance of flavors and textures, characteristics that reflected David's precise understanding of cooking chemistry and his ability to control variables that Amanda typically managed through experience and intuition. Several co-workers remembered David mentioning that Amanda had begun questioning him about his ingredient sources and preparation methods with an intensity that seemed to go beyond normal professional curiosity. She had made pointed comments about the dangers of working with wild mushrooms and had repeatedly warned David about the importance of proper identification techniques when foraging for ingredients, conversations that had struck David as oddly threatening given her typically supportive approach to sharing knowledge with other kitchen staff. The warnings had become more specific and ominous in the weeks leading up to David's death, with Amanda making references to specific types of mushroom poisoning and describing in graphic detail the symptoms that victims would experience. She had shared stories about foragers who had died after consuming toxic species, always emphasizing how easy it was to make fatal mistakes when working with wild mushrooms, conversations that had made David increasingly uncomfortable and suspicious of her motives. Amanda's discussions of mushroom poisoning had been detailed and clinical, revealing a level of knowledge about toxicology that went far beyond what would be necessary for safe foraging practices. She had described the progression of amatoxin poisoning with the precision of someone who had studied the subject extensively, including information about symptom timelines, organ damage, and survival rates that suggested research rather than casual knowledge. David's girlfriend, Jennifer Martinez, later told investigators that David had become genuinely worried about Amanda's behavior in the final weeks of his life. He had described feeling like he was being stalked within the confines of the restaurant, with Amanda appearing whenever he was working alone and asking probing questions about his plans and activities outside of work. David had mentioned that Amanda seemed to know things about his personal life that he hadn't discussed with her, including details about his apartment, his car, and his relationship with Jennifer. Jennifer remembered David expressing particular concern about Amanda's questions regarding his dietary habits and food preferences, conversations that had seemed innocuous at the time but which took on sinister significance after his death. Amanda had asked detailed questions about David's allergies, his favorite foods, and his willingness to try new ingredients, information that would have been valuable for someone planning to poison him without arousing suspicion. The couple had discussed whether David should report his concerns to executive chef Thompson or restaurant management, but David had been reluctant to make accusations that he couldn't substantiate with concrete evidence. The restaurant industry was notorious for workplace gossip and interpersonal drama, and David feared that complaining about Amanda's behavior would make him appear unprofessional and damage his reputation within Louisville's culinary community. David's hesitation to report Amanda's behavior had been influenced by the power dynamics within professional kitchens, where accusations of harassment or inappropriate conduct could have career-ending consequences for those who made them. Amanda's reputation as a respected mushroom expert and her longer tenure in Louisville's restaurant scene had given her credibility that David, as a relative newcomer, felt he couldn't challenge without overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing. David's friend and fellow chef Carlos Santos later told investigators that David had confided his growing fears about Amanda during their last conversation on October 10, just 2 days before David's death. Carlos remembered David saying that Amanda had been offering to help him with ingredient preparation and recipe development in ways that felt intrusive and manipulative, and that he had begun declining her offers because he no longer trusted her intentions. The final conversation between David and Carlos had taken place at a local bar after their shifts had ended, and Carlos later recalled that David had seemed more worried than he had ever seen him. David had mentioned that Amanda had been making increasingly frequent offers to taste his cooking and provide feedback on new recipes, suggestions that David had started to view as potential opportunities for her to harm him through food tampering or poisoning. David had also expressed concern about Amanda's access to his workstation and ingredients, noting that she had been finding excuses to work in his area of the kitchen even when her own responsibilities didn't require her to be there. He had begun taking precautions to secure his ingredients and cooking utensils, behavior that his co-workers had interpreted as increased professional conscientiousness rather than fear for his personal safety. The morning of October 12th had begun routinely, with David arriving at Bourbon and Bluegrass at 5 a.m. to begin preparation for the lunch service. Restaurant security cameras showed him entering through the back door using his key card, and nothing about his demeanor suggested that he was aware of any immediate danger. Amanda was scheduled to arrive at 7 a.m. for the same shift, but the cameras showed her entering the building at 5:45 a.m., nearly an hour and 15 minutes earlier than her official start time. Security footage revealed that Amanda had immediately gone to David's prep station and had spent several minutes working at his station while he was in the walk-in cooler gathering ingredients. The cameras showed her handling various containers and utensils at David's workspace, actions that would later prove to be crucial evidence in establishing how she had administered the poison that would kill him. The security system at Bourbon and Bluegrass had been installed primarily to prevent theft and monitor employee access to the building, but the cameras had inadvertently captured detailed footage of Amanda's movements during the critical period when she had poisoned David's food. The high-resolution images showed her removing small containers from her personal bag and adding their contents to ingredients that David was preparing for menu testing. Digital forensics analysis of the restaurant's computer systems revealed that Amanda had accessed David's recipe files and preparation notes in the days leading up to his death, gaining detailed information about his planned menu items and ingredient combinations. This access had allowed her to plan exactly how to introduce the amatoxin into David's food in a way that would seem natural and avoid detection during the preparation process. The medical examiner's initial examination of David's body had revealed no obvious signs of trauma or violence, supporting the preliminary assumption that he had died from natural causes. But the autopsy conducted 2 days later revealed the presence of amatoxin, a deadly toxin found in several species of poisonous mushrooms, including the destroying angel and death cap mushrooms that were occasionally found in Kentucky's forests but were never used in professional kitchens due to their lethal properties. Dr. Patricia Walsh, the forensic pathologist who conducted David's autopsy, explained that amatoxin poisoning was particularly insidious because symptoms often didn't appear until hours after consumption, and initial symptoms could be mistaken for common foodborne illness or flu. The toxin caused progressive liver and kidney damage that was often fatal even with aggressive medical treatment, making it an almost perfect murder weapon for someone with the knowledge to use it effectively. The autopsy results revealed that David had consumed a significant amount of amatoxin, suggesting that his killer had used multiple destroying angel mushrooms to ensure a lethal dose. The concentration of toxin in David's system indicated that he had been given enough poison to kill several people, demonstrating either the killer's uncertainty about effective dosage or their desire to ensure that the victim would not survive even with immediate medical intervention. Toxicology experts consulted during the investigation explained that Amanda's choice of amatoxin as a murder weapon had been particularly cruel because the victim would have experienced several hours of increasing discomfort and illness before the toxin caused fatal organ failure. David would have been aware that something was seriously wrong with his health, but the delayed onset of symptoms would have made it impossible for him to identify the source of his poisoning or seek appropriate treatment. The discovery of amatoxin poisoning immediately transformed the investigation from a routine inquiry into a workplace death into a complex homicide case that would challenge investigators' understanding of how culinary expertise could be weaponized to commit murder. Amatoxin poisoning was extremely rare, typically occurring only when inexperienced foragers mistakenly consumed toxic mushrooms they had misidentified as edible varieties. But David Chen was an experienced chef who would never have made such a basic error, and the presence of amatoxin in his system suggested that he had been deliberately poisoned by someone with sophisticated knowledge of mycology and access to toxic mushroom species. The investigation immediately focused on David's co-workers and associates, particularly those with expertise in foraged ingredients and wild mushroom identification. Detective Rodriguez began interviewing everyone who had access to the restaurant's kitchen and who might have had the knowledge necessary to obtain and administer amatoxin. The investigation revealed that very few people in Louisville possessed the expertise required to identify, harvest, and process destroying angel mushrooms in a way that would be lethal to consume, making Amanda Wilson an obvious suspect due to her well-known reputation as a mycology expert. The investigation into potential suspects revealed that Amanda was one of only 3 people in Louisville with sufficient expertise in toxic mushrooms to have committed this particular crime. The other 2 suspects were quickly eliminated through solid alibis and lack of motive, leaving Amanda as the only person with both the knowledge and the opportunity to have poisoned David with amatoxin. Amanda Wilson's reputation as a mushroom expert made her an obvious person of interest in the investigation, Though her initial cooperation with investigators and her apparent grief over David's death had initially diverted suspicion toward other potential suspects. She had been questioned extensively about her knowledge of toxic mushrooms and her whereabouts during the time when David was believed to have been poisoned, but she had provided what appeared to be credible answers to all of the investigators' questions. Amanda claimed that she had arrived at work early on October 12 to prepare for a catering event that was scheduled for later that day, and security camera footage confirmed her presence in the building during the time frame when David was believed to have consumed the poisoned food. But the cameras also showed her moving through areas of the kitchen where David had been working, and forensic analysis would later reveal that she had accessed David's prep station during a period when he had briefly left the kitchen. The investigation was complicated by the nature of professional kitchens, where multiple people had access to food preparation areas and ingredients were routinely shared between different stations and projects. Determining exactly when and how David had been exposed to the amatoxin required careful analysis of his movements, his food consumption, and the timeline of his symptoms, which had apparently begun several hours before his death but had been subtle enough that he hadn't recognized them as signs of poisoning. Detective Rodriguez spent weeks interviewing David's co-workers and friends, trying to piece together a comprehensive picture of his final days and identify anyone who might have had both the motive and the knowledge necessary to poison him with such a sophisticated toxin. The investigation revealed the extent of the professional rivalry between David and Amanda, but establishing that Amanda had actually committed murder required more than evidence of workplace tension and expert knowledge of poisonous mushrooms. The breakthrough came 6 months after David's death, when forensic analysts examining Amanda's personal belongings discovered traces of amatoxin in a small container found in her apartment. The container had been carefully cleaned, but advanced DNA analysis techniques revealed microscopic traces of the toxin along with David's DNA, providing physical evidence that connected Amanda to both the poison and the victim. Further investigation revealed that Amanda had been collecting and cultivating toxic mushroom species for several years, maintaining detailed journals about their properties and effects that demonstrated a level of expertise that went far beyond normal culinary applications. The journals contained specific information about dosage calculations and symptom timelines that suggested Amanda had been researching how to use amatoxin as a murder weapon long before David's death. The journals also revealed Amanda's growing resentment toward David and other chefs who had received recognition that she believed she deserved. Her entries documented every slight and perceived injustice, creating a psychological portrait of someone whose professional jealousy had evolved into murderous rage. The journals showed that Amanda had been planning David's murder for at least 2 months before actually carrying it out. Digital forensics experts discovered that Amanda had been researching amatoxin poisoning extensively using her home computer, accessing medical journals and toxicology reports that detailed the effects of destroying angel mushroom consumption. Her search history revealed queries about detection methods, symptom timelines, and lethal dosages that would have been valuable information for someone planning to commit murder using this particular poison. The evidence also revealed that Amanda had deliberately fed David a small amount of destroying angel mushroom that she had incorporated into a sauce he had been testing for a new menu item. The mushroom had been disguised among other foraged ingredients that David routinely used in his cooking, making it impossible for him to detect the deadly addition until the symptoms of amatoxin poisoning had already begun to manifest. Security footage analysis revealed that Amanda had prepared the poison sauce at David's station while he was away from his workspace, using his own ingredients and preparation methods to ensure that the toxin would be consumed without suspicion. The calculated nature of the crime demonstrated Amanda's intimate knowledge of David's work habits and her careful planning to ensure that the poisoning would appear to be accidental. Amanda's arrest came on April 15, 2019, 6 months after David's death and after investigators had spent weeks gathering evidence that would support a murder conviction. The case had required extensive collaboration between local police, forensic toxicologists, and mycology experts who could explain the complex science behind amatoxin poisoning and establish that Amanda's actions had been deliberate rather than accidental. The arrest occurred at Amanda's apartment, where she had been maintaining a facade of normal life while secretly monitoring the investigation's progress and attempting to destroy evidence that might connect her to David's murder. When Detective Rodriguez arrived with the arrest warrant, Amanda initially maintained her innocence but quickly broke down when confronted with the forensic evidence that conclusively linked her to the crime. The interrogation that followed Amanda's arrest revealed the full extent of her psychological breakdown and the twisted logic that had motivated her to murder a colleague whose only crime had been professional success. Amanda's confession was rambling and emotionally charged, revealing years of accumulated resentment and a delusional belief that David had deliberately sabotaged her career and stolen recognition that belonged to her. The trial of Amanda Wilson began in October 2019, featuring testimony from forensic experts, restaurant industry professionals, and David's friends and family members who described both the professional rivalry that had motivated the murder and David's growing awareness that he was in danger. The prosecution argued that Amanda had used her reputation as a mushroom expert to gain David's trust and then exploited that trust to feed him a lethal dose of amatoxin disguised in ingredients he believed were safe. The trial provided a comprehensive education in the science of mushroom toxicology, with expert witnesses explaining how amatoxin worked at the cellular level and why it was so difficult to treat once consumed. The testimony revealed that Amanda's method of murder had been particularly cruel, as David had suffered for hours before dying while remaining unaware that he had been poisoned by someone he had considered a colleague and friend. Amanda's defense attorneys argued that David's death had been accidental, the result of a foraging error that had contaminated ingredients in the restaurant's kitchen, but the evidence of Amanda's research into toxic mushrooms and the presence of amatoxin in her personal belongings made it impossible to maintain that David's poisoning had been unintentional. The jury convicted Amanda of first-degree murder after deliberating for less than 8 hours. The sentencing phase of Amanda's trial provided an opportunity for David's family and friends to describe the impact of losing a talented young chef whose potential had been cut short by jealousy and professional rivalry. David's parents, who had emigrated from Taiwan to provide better opportunities for their children, described their son's passion for cooking and his dreams of eventually opening his own restaurant that would honor both his Asian heritage and his adopted Kentucky home. Amanda Wilson was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole, ensuring that she would spend the rest of her life paying for a murder that had been motivated by nothing more than professional jealousy and the inability to accept that a colleague had achieved recognition that she believed she deserved. The judge's remarks emphasized that Amanda had violated the trust that was essential to professional kitchens and had used her expertise to commit a crime that was both premeditated and extraordinarily cruel. The case became a cautionary tale within Louisville's restaurant industry, highlighting how competitive pressure and unchecked jealousy could transform professional relationships into deadly rivalries. Restaurant owners and managers began paying closer attention to interpersonal dynamics among kitchen staff and implementing policies designed to prevent workplace conflicts from escalating into violence. Detective Rodriguez's investigation of Amanda Wilson became a model for how law enforcement agencies could address crimes involving specialized knowledge and expertise, demonstrating the importance of consulting with subject matter experts and using advanced forensic techniques to solve cases that required understanding of complex scientific principles. The case also highlighted how seemingly natural deaths could actually be sophisticated murders that required careful investigation to uncover. The impact of David Chen's murder extended beyond the immediate criminal case, as his death prompted discussions within the culinary community about workplace safety, professional ethics, and the responsibility that employers had to protect their staff from internal threats. The case demonstrated how competitive industries could create environments where rivalries became dangerous and where warning signs of potential violence were often dismissed or ignored. As this investigation into how professional jealousy led to murder in one of Louisville's most respected kitchens comes to a close, it serves as a reminder that deadly violence can emerge from seemingly ordinary workplace conflicts when individuals with specialized knowledge and access choose to use their expertise for criminal purposes. Amanda Wilson's ability to use her reputation as a mushroom expert to gain David Chen's trust and then exploit that trust to commit murder demonstrates how professional relationships can be weaponized by those willing to cross ethical and legal boundaries. If you've been following this case and others where workplace competition turns lethal, we want to hear your thoughts about how employers and co-workers can better recognize and address warning signs of dangerous rivalries before they escalate into violence. Share your theories in the comments below. Subscribe to stay updated on cases where specialized knowledge becomes a tool for murder, and hit the notification bell so you never miss when we explore investigations that prove even the most trusted professionals can harbor deadly secrets.